I'd like now to throw it open to general questions. We'll try to do it through Katie. Are you there, Katie?
Yep. We've had a few.
Can you get back to Stephen Nagler's question, which we didn't answer from a bit earlier on in the meeting?
Yeah, I've got those, but I've got a couple others as well, so we'll get to that one for sure. So back for Peter, from Tom. Peter says, thank you for your great presentation. Echo, well done. And Tom would like to know if there's any way that eminent domain can be displayed on the map somehow. Is there any sort of sense of that in any of the visual language that's there?
Sorry, what do you mean by eminent domain?
Orderly end.
Yeah, if you go into the first slide, right, all that area shown in green is essentially parkland, and hence has a orderly end house in the midst of it. So that was the local eminence we had around there. At that time, it's labelled as being owned by Sir John Griffin KV. So having this green of that shading, as opposed to a somewhat darker green for woodland, this paler green is parkland owned by local nobility or aristocracy at any rate.
Which is about 5 times larger than the nearest town as well.
Yes, correct.
Yeah, as one would expect. Thank you. And again, a reminder to everyone, you can either pop questions in the chat or use that icon in the bar at the bottom of your Zoom screen to raise a hand. So now we're going to go to a question for Mark Hoffield from Ana Soto Camino. She writes that was a lovely chart you shared. And just yesterday, she learned of Basil Brown's endeavors regarding not just the archaeological efforts in the late 1930s at Sutton Hoo, for which there is the new movie, but also in gathering data for astronomical charts. And while also trying to make them accessible, quote, to the common man, as he once supposedly said. So your star chart came to me just in time to add some color to my findings about Basil Brown, which was all new to me. So more of a comment and an appreciation, but thank you again, Mark, for that wonderful star chart you showed us. Then for Mark Monmonier, we have from Stephen Nagler. He would like to know, was either the clock or compass system copied by others later? And if so, where else was it applied?
Well, I have a short answer to that. Basically, no, not as far as I know. It was not taken up by anybody else, to the best of my knowledge.
Okay.
In modern day information analytics, this concept is used. So catchments in my work, we take thousands of points every 200 yards apart from each other on a map, and we draw time rings around them. And so this concept of like, what is it like from a particular point on a map? In this case, there's six different circling. This concept has right. You're answering a question about what's it like for a particular point, and that's done in a big way now in GIS systems.
Data clustering algorithms too in different applications.
Well, I mentioned in the chat, it reminds me of the spiral layout of the arrondissements of Paris, and I wondered if Plato was familiar with that. This is obviously far more regular, which is arguably a benefit, but of course the arrondissements presumably follow socially defined or naturally defined regions, and it seems to me the interesting debate between whether you follow a mathematical grid or a naturally defined regions. But that spiral formation I thought was interesting, and I think is interesting in Paris.
Well, there is something which is, obviously one would say natural about Plato's scheme. But as far as an addressing scheme and a cartographic scheme instantiated on a map, I have not seen anything like that. It could be useful, certainly as somebody pointed out, for referring to locations, but in a cartographic sense, I'd have to say no. If you have some examples, I'd be really delighted to see them.
Right. Well, that's a challenge.
Yeah.
We
I
really
mean,
appreciate
Mark,
it.
you mean the historic examples, right?
Well, yeah, I mean, historic examples. I mean, to make this work, you not only have to have a map, but you have to have a directory. So these two things would more or less go hand in hand. Unfortunately, in Plato's case, the maps and the directories often became detached from each other. And the particular map I had, I bought the map itself. I don't know where the directory went. There have been other cases where I've been able to find maps in libraries like this, in archives, but the directory has gone missing. There's also, I guess, an interesting story here. Plato, early in his business, was fairly conscientious in copywriting things. And when he filed his copyright application, the Copyright Office, the Library of Congress, apparently took the filing as a pamphlet. And they did not separate out the maps from the pamphlet. And the pamphlets apparently were tossed after being considered too quotidian by the people at the library. I found only 2 of Plato's maps in the collections of the Library of Congress. One of these was donated, I believe, in the 1990s. Another one, oddly enough, was a map that he made for Erie County, Pennsylvania, the only one in Erie County. Generally speaking, the deposit copies that accompany a copyright, and there's supposed to be 2 of these have very disappointedly basically gone missing. I call this the pamphlet curse.
That happens a lot. We have a couple, thank you very much, Mark. And that reminds me of that we don't have the key for the plan that I showed. And very often these things get either separated when they're in their original owner's hands, or else later for archival practices. And that makes it very hard to recover some of the information. We have a couple of questions now from Martin. So the first one is from Ken Habib. And he just says, I did not catch how you came about that map. Also, was there much of a legend on the map, or did you come up with all of the number backgrounds yourself? So could you explain better the number background and the key that goes along with those, please, Martin?
All right. Well, of course, the map itself, this has a key, as you can see, in a legend. And luckily, most of my maps are either in Latin or German, so this is easy. It's in English. But as far as a number of names that are scattered around the maps, especially dealing with Noah's sons and all that, and the rivers and stuff, I would look at, Genesis 2, Genesis 4, Genesis 10 gives the families of Noah's descendants, that sort of thing, to help on that. And then, I guess the other names, tend to be names of that century, and just sort of, linking those together. I guess probably, perhaps, the chapters in Genesis probably was the most useful in targeting some of the biblical names. And then what's unusual is the name in the vignettes, they have the name for God. And that's unusual because, the spelling of God's name, that's the name that's in the Torah. If you go to Genesis 1, that's the name used. And it's amazing because this is a Christian publication to go into Christian Bibles, and yet they're very accurate in using the name of God. And that's the name you cannot pronounce of God. And it's found in the beginning, first chapter. So I thought that was quite remarkable, you know, of what they chose as far as the Hebrew. That's the only, you know, other than English, that's the only other in terms of language used.
And then there's a follow-up question about how do you modernize those names when it's something like New Holland for Australia? That one's an easier one, but when they're kind of over large parts of what is now Russia, how do you kind of decide about modernizing those?
Well, I do research and look at, okay, during this time period of 1680, what was going on there historically, you know, what was, you know, and just sort of drawing forward, you know, what do we call that area today? You know, of course, the most challenging is around where Eden is, the Garden of Eden. That's sort of unique, has towns like Nod, Enoch, you find that in Genesis. Genesis 4, and to identify, you know, the rivers, the names, all that. Those are all things in Genesis, and that's where I put like the Gihon River. That's in Genesis, and all that. So you know, that's the source.
Excellent. And that's actually all the questions we've had, but we have had a lot of people saying they quite enjoyed things. Oh, no, I just got a question from Lawrence. Thanks for sliding that in there. Okay, so can I comment on the production or lack of it of printed versions of this genre of military map? Sure. So a lot of these well, it's not necessarily these, because this one I do think is, and Peter Barber can correct me if I'm wrong, I do think this one, although it is quite ornate, is more meant and maybe as an official document, because it does look a lot like the Cotton Collection maps, which were mostly created for Elizabeth I as updates or kind of responses to the overall the conflict itself. So they're more official documents or meant for a very elite audience that was going to be reviewed by her and her officials. But there are a large amount of these maps that do get printed for public consumption and run as broadsides and things like that. So there's a huge interest in these, and like I said, the Royal Collection Trust, I can actually get the link and I'll put it in the chat for everyone. The Royal Collection Trust has a large collection of those that were printed, and some of those are more what you might see in periodicals, although there aren't as many periodicals at this time, there's just a few. But some are clearly meant for kind of a cheaper audience, but then others are very large, printed on really nice paper, and are actually very similar to the world map we're seeing now in that they have really big keys that are showing, or legends that are showing kind of every single step of this battle. And then what I find really interesting about them is that a lot of them are actually showing they're showing different moments in the battle. So even though it's a two-dimensional kind of plane, there's actually 6 or 7 different snapshots of the battle happening at one time. So let me just grab that link and I'll put it in the chat so people can see a lot more of the printed ones of these, which would have been really kind of the most up-to-date kind of news about this war that of course the English public would have been very interested in keeping up to date with.
Thank you very much, Katie. That was a superb answer. Brilliant.
Has anybody else sneaked in there, Katie? I can't see anybody from my end.
Not that I saw. No, that's all the questions we had so far.
I have a question for Martin on this map. I'm trying to recall maps of a similar time period and what geographic accuracy or inaccuracy they might have had. It would be interesting to me to think about how this map would compare to another map of the same time period.
Yeah. Well, look at maps that have California as an island. And probably those of us in Texas probably wish California was an island again.
Moving on rapidly, Martin.
It's still a strange land.
I live there and I agree.
Okay, so I've just put that link in the chat if people want to see those. Jay has asked how soon do we get to do this again, which I think is a good transition to Mike for some closing words and thanks and things.
Well, this is where I tactfully say, Jay, as soon as we can assemble at least as good a group of presenters. And we'd like to put the word out to people who've never considered this before. I'd love to hear from you personally on my email, which you've had in your original invitations, but it's drsweeting@aol.com, drsweeting@aol.com. And if you'd like to present in the future, anybody, or you know somebody who's a member or who should be a member, again, I would like to hear from them. But strange enough, we're putting a strong arm on them to join if they do wish to present. When will that be? Well, not next month or anything like that, but when we have enough people, we'd love to have another one. Thank you so much, everyone, for attending. Thank you for making it what it has been, stimulating, fresh. And it's amazing how it's possible to be fresh on something from the 17th century, for instance, but it's been demonstrated this evening, hasn't it? So I would really encourage you in 2022 to support all the different levels of the map world. Most of those levels have been challenged, shall we say, by COVID. I'm glad that societies have benefited because of the online aspect, but let's do what we can to support the dealers, to support the academics, buy their books, and all that kind of thing, so that what we love and appreciate flourishes more in 2022 than it had the opportunity to do so in 2021. So I think that's it from me, Katie. It starts to sound like two people on a dodgy news channel, doesn't it? But actually we're pretty well on our final ending point anyway. So thank you very much all indeed. The end.
Everybody have a great night. Thank you.